right, everybody, welcome to the last roundtable of 2025. Thank you all very much for being here. So just quickly, if this is your first time at the roundtable, we are GNRC. We are a development district that covers a 13-county MSA in northern upper middle Tennessee. We cover a few other counties depending on the project, but main goal is to just improve life for Middle Tennesseans. So we offer a variety of programs and services to meet that end, including aging and disability services, various planning like economic community development, community design, and of course, environmental planning. We started the roundtable in 2020 to sort of convene environmental experts from around the region to talk about sort of hot button issues that are relevant to all of our work, and also so that you can all give input on some of the plans we make. We've had a great year so far of meetings. We've covered water quality and supply, farmland preservation, a lot of climate planning and transportation planning. So today, we may have some people rolling in a little as we get going, but the focus for today is to sort of continue with our climate action planning. First, we're going to go through welcome and introductions. Just introduce yourself to the group, and we have another fun little question as per usual. Second, we're going to talk about climate action planning and specifically our consultants' data work that's been going on. So that's going to include our greenhouse gas inventory and our business as usual emissions projections. And we have two members of our consultant team, Kayla Stein and Katie O'Malley, who are going to be joining via Teams to talk to us about that. And then we are going to go through our proposed emissions reduction measures, and the handout I sent in my email and that you may have grabbed out front will accompany that discussion. We're just going to sort of walk through them together, get some feedback, and then we'll have an ask sort of at the end. You can email me feedback. We'll get to that. And then typical stuff, we'll do the around the table where all of you can share relevant things you've been working on, projects, events, things like that. Then some GNRC staff. We have a few people who are going to share various projects that we've been working on, just a little update on those. And then we will adjourn. All right. So to begin, welcome and introductions. You are going to say your name and organization. And then just a very simple, cutesy little question today. What's your favorite thing to do in the snow? So I will start and we can head this way around the table and then sort of starting with you, we'll snake around the back there if we want to. But if you all, for sake of time, unless maybe just do name and position for you. Yeah. Okay. All right. I will start.
GNRC staff.
Yes. No, yes. You. Yeah. Okay. I am Skylar Ellis. I'm an environmental planner with GNRC. And my favorite thing to do in the snow is build a snowman.
Hi, everybody. Maddie Bowles, also environmental planner with GNRC. I have a dog and he really likes the snow, so I like to take him on walks.
Dennis Molina, Town of Smyrna, grant coordinator. Don't have really grants right now in the environmental sector, but love to network for some letters of support. That'd be possible. I have a dog also, so she runs around in the snow and just playing with her.
Hi, my name is Megan Matson. I'm the TDM administrator for NDOT, and I'm from Minnesota, so I don't really like the snow because we get whacked with it every year. But I will say snow tubing in Minnesota is super, super fun.
Shandira Edgecombe, I'm the TDM planner for the National Connector at NDOT. Grew up on an island. I try to avoid snow as much as possible.
Thompson, CDEC, Air Pollution Control, Grants Contract Manager, and I like to stay out of the snow because I do not like the cold.
I'm Delaney King. I'm an attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center, and similarly, I love watching snow fall outside from inside.
Reginald Archer, I'm associate professor at Tennessee State University in the Department of Environmental Sciences. I like to watch my daughter play around in the snow.
I'm Catherine Price, the Education and Engagement Division Manager with the Cumberland River Compact, and I like to open the blinds at night and to be able to see kind of the light over the snow in the evening with a fire on.
Chris Bonix, Vanderbilt University, research professor in Earth and Environmental Sciences and director of the Research Office of Education. I'm gonna say I love sledding. I think it's fun and I still do it. I like it more than I probably should.
My name's Natalie. I'm with the Division of Water Resources at TDEC as an environmental engineer. And I'm from Arizona, so snow is still like an exciting thing to me. But I like the idea of snow, but I don't necessarily like being in the snow, so whatever that means.
Erin Mello, I'm with Metro Nashville General Services Sustainability Division. My favorite thing to do in the snow is probably to make snow angels on the tops of our cars with my daughter.
I'm Erin Hutchins. I'm on business development for ECD. And my favorite thing to do in the snow is sledding. We have a big hill, so we're the party house in the neighborhood.
My name is Sarah Elliott. I'm the State Health Plan Director with the Tennessee Department of Health. And I also enjoy sledding, but it feels like it never snows enough to be able to actually sled. So maybe this year.
Well, good. I'm Pat Couples, State Director for Sierra Club, and I grew up in Michigan, so lots of snow there, and I started skiing about 4 years ago, so that's my favorite passion. Yeah.
I'm McIntyre Wilkinson. I am with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, Land and Water Stewardship Section, and I like to take photographs.
How are we doing, staff? Hey, I'm Rachel Sullivan, the Outreach Manager with GNRC.
Hi, Matthew Cushing, Transportation Planning Manager with GNRC.
Daniel McDonald, Director of Transportation Infrastructure.
Jessica Hill, Director of Community and Regional Planning.
Andrew McIntyre, Transportation Planner at GNRC.
I'm Napoli, Director of Economic and Community Development at GNRC.
Chris Barber, Economic and Community Development Specialist.
Jennifer Lawler, Director of Research and Analytics at the GNRC.
Ed Branding, Real Estate Researcher. The main thing I like about snow is remembering what it looked like before it melted.
I'm Anna Shealy, GIS Research Analyst at GNRC.
I'm Taylor Salisbury. I'm an intern in the Community and Regional Planning Department, specialized in disaster planning.
I'm Deborah Mukherjee, Senior Planner at GNRC.
I'm Connor Carroll. I'm an intern in the ECD department.
I'm Newton, GIS Research Analyst, GNRC.
Great. And then like I mentioned, we have a few members of our CPRG consultant teams joining us via Teams. So maybe starting with Katie, if you guys want to jump around, introduce yourselves very quickly.
Hey everyone, can you all hear me okay? You can?
Yeah.
Okay, great. You're all a small icon. I'm sure I'm stretched out on the screen somewhere. Nice to meet you all. I'm Katie O'Malley. I'm the project manager from ICF, helping out with the comprehensive climate action plan for the region. My favorite thing to do in the snow is skiing.
And I'll go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Kayla Stein. I also work at ICF, and I'm helping Katie out with the climate action plan for and my favorite thing to do in the snow is also to ski.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're going to try and get the volume up on that a little bit. Okay. Well, thank you everybody again for your introductions. Very nice to have you all here today. And moving along, if my clicker will go. It's not. Do we know the clicker stopped working? Sorry, everybody, technical difficulties. Oh, okay, there we go. Right. So moving into our climate action planning section, this is where we are going to have our consultants, Kayla Stein and Katie O'Malley. They're, again, joining on Teams, and they're just going to walk us through the greenhouse gas inventory and the business as usual projections. work with us here because they are going to be shouting out next when I move the slide. So, all right. And I will give it away to you, Katie and Kayla.
Thanks, Skylar. All right, so as Skylar mentioned, we will be discussing the greenhouse gas inventory and BAU projections for GNRC that we have calculated. So next slide. Yeah, just our agenda. We're going to go over first the greenhouse gas inventory overview, and then the approach that we used, and then the results, and then the same thing for the business as usual scenario. And at the end, we'll have time for questions. Next slide. So for the greenhouse gas inventory, the map on the left shows the 17 counties that were included in this inventory. These are the same counties that were included in the Priority Climate Action Plan, the PCAP, that was developed previously. We used ICLEI's ClearPath 2.0 tool, which is the same tool, but a newer version that was used to create the PCAP inventory. And we used the same base year as which is 2019. And so the sectors that are included in this inventory include stationary energy, transportation, waste, industrial processes and product use, which is a new sector from the PCAP, and then agriculture, forestry, and other land use, also called AFLU, which has some additional subsectors that were not included in the PCAP that are included in this analysis, as well as the waste sector now includes wastewater emissions, which were not included in the PCAP. So those are all the changes from the PCAP's inventory. And then we just wanted to note one gap of data that we had here was within the IPPU sector, the industrial product use subsector did not have enough granular for this region, and so it was not included in the inventory. Next slide, please. So the approach that we used for the inventory was first to collect all of the necessary data. We mostly used data sources that were used in the PCAP, and then we added some additional data sources for the sectors that were new to this analysis from the PCAP. We then incorporated that data into a master Excel file and then linked this Excel file to data playbooks that were county specific. So ICLEI's tool requires us to use these data playbooks that they have developed. And so we pulled the data from our master Excel file into those 17 county data playbooks. We then uploaded those data playbooks to ClearPath, downloaded the results, and reviewed the results with a QA/QC file. Next slide. So the results seen here show both the gross emissions and the net emissions for GNRC. So the gross emissions refer to the total amount of greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere from all sources. So you can see every sector here has emissions in the gross emissions section. And then the net emissions subtract out the carbon sequestration from the agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector, which is accounting for sequestration from emission captured by carbon sinks like forests. So as you can see here, the stationary energy and transportation sectors are by far the largest emitting sectors, and only sector that is sequestering carbon. And then we just have a small comparison here of our net emissions to Knoxville and Tennessee's inventories. Knoxville, it's a different year, but still similar. And you can see that the net emissions from this Nashville region are larger than Knoxville, but smaller than Tennessee, which is as we would expect. Next slide. So here we have just another breakdown showing the 2019 inventory by sector. As I mentioned, the stationary energy and transportation sector are the highest emitting sectors. Net emissions are 13% lower than gross emissions. So when we account for carbon sequestration, the emissions reduced by 13%. And as I mentioned, AFLU is a net sink. So the AFLU sector sequesters more than it is emitting. Next slide. So now just a deep dive into the two sectors with the largest emissions. So first we're looking at transportation, looking at the different subsectors that are within the transportation sector to see where the largest potential for reduction is. So as we can see here, the on-road subsector is by far the largest sector. And the data source that we use to compile the data input to calculate the inventory for on-road was vehicle miles traveled. And the source that we got this data from is the Tennessee Department of Transportation's 2019 Highway Performance Monitoring System. And then for the other subsectors, we got the data from EPA's National Emissions Inventory. And so the largest potential for reductions obviously comes from the on-road transportation subsector. And within that subsector, the largest emitting activities are light-duty gasoline passenger vehicles and heavy-duty diesel vehicles, which includes vehicles like semi-trucks, service vehicles, and public transportation. Next slide. So on this slide, we're diving into the stationary energy sector. So this sector includes energy use by commercial, residential, and industrial buildings, as well as fugitive emissions from oil and gas systems. And as is shown here, commercial and residential buildings offer the largest potential for reductions. Industrial buildings also provide a pretty good source of reduction potential as well. And the data sources that we used for this sector, for the natural gas and electricity usage, we use the National Renewable Energy Laboratory State and Local Planning for Energy database. And then we received the number of units of heating fuel from the US Census Bureau's 2019 American Community Survey. Next slide. So then the last three sectors, just quickly to go over them. For the waste sector, the solid waste emissions, which come from methane produced by landfills, accounts for a large majority, 97% of the sector's emissions. Wastewater only makes up a small percentage of these emissions. For IPPU, as I mentioned previously, all of these emissions are coming from industrial processes, which these emissions arise from chemical transformations during the manufacturing of materials. And then lastly, as I've mentioned, the AFLU sector is a net sink, meaning that the sequestration from forestry and other trees is greater than the emissions from agriculture, livestock, and land use. Next slide. And so lastly, we have a graph here, or two, we're gonna have two graphs. One graph here showing the results by county. So you can see that Davidson County is by far the largest emitting county, which makes sense as it is the most populous. Stewart County also sequestered the most carbon, sequestering 11% of regional sequestration, which is about double what we would expect if all counties were sequestering the same amount. And then stationary energy and transportation, which are the largest sectors for the region, are also the largest sectors in most counties. However, we wanted to note that in Humphreys County, IPPU is actually the largest sector. And in Stewart County, IPPU is the second largest emitting sector behind stationary energy. So those two counties have a good amount of industrial processes and emissions. Next slide. And so this is the last slide here for the inventory where we have the per capita emissions by county. And so we just wanted to note that in a per capita sense, Davidson County has pretty average emissions, even though it had the largest emissions overall, since there's a large population in Davidson County. And then also that Humphreys County has the highest gross emissions per capita, with their largest sector being IPPU, followed by stationary energy. And next slide. And now I will hand it over to Katie to go over the business as usual scenario.
Thank you. Excuse me. All right, next slide. Perfect. So the business as usual scenario, this is the projection of greenhouse gas emissions if the region proceeds with no further climate action. So similar to the greenhouse gas inventory, we used ClearPath for the BAU, and its primary projection assumption is that emissions across all sectors except land use align with population growth across each county. So the data source we used is listed here, the Woods and Pool 2023 vintage projections. And region-wide populations estimated to increase by 45%. And in this scenario, emissions increase similarly by about the same amount over a time frame to 2050. So this scenario overall creates the benchmark for long-term planning and goal setting. It identifies the largest sectors of emissions and the potential for emission reductions, helps guide decision makers such as yourselves towards the most impactful near and long-term climate actions. It will not be the only projection we do. So on the next slide, I'll mention that a bit more, if you don't mind moving forward. So we show the results here of the BAU visually by sector through 2050. We're running another projection as well that will represent the emissions reductions from implementation of the measures that we'll discuss later during this roundtable. So our next step after finalizing the strategies will be to model the emission reduction potential over the same time frame to give us another emission projection scenario to compare against the BAU. There are a number draft numbers on this slide as well. We're still finalizing a few assumptions and making some changes, but overall, these trends identify a clear opportunity for focused climate action across all of these sectors. Certainly an emphasis on buildings and transportation, which are expected to make up the greatest share of emissions in 2050. But across the board, all of these sectors offer an opportunity for reductions. That's the quick preview of the BAU. Pretty straightforward, but we're still finalizing. Happy to answer any questions on the greenhouse gas inventory or the BAU. Otherwise, the next steps and subsequent analyses will be covered by GNRC. But we've got some contact information here as well. Thanks all for listening.
Does anybody have any questions for them about any of this information?
So does the carbon that's produced by refueling EVs go into transportation, or does that go into power production?
Transportation.
It goes into transportation.
Yep.
Yes, I think your path does assume, because it looks at the fuel of the vehicles. Yeah, so the data sources, part of it is knowing the fuel of the vehicles. And so, yes, it does.
I have a question. Which census year were used to generate the per capita estimates for each county?
Do you hear that, Kate?
That's our Woods and Pool projection.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
We have especially smoothed or an adjusted version of Woods and Pool, which I believe is the 2022.
2023 vintage.
2023.
23.
Yep.
Okay.
2023.
That's right here.
Well, if nobody has any other questions, thank you very much, Kayla and Katie, for talking to us.
Of course. Yep. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
So as they mentioned, sort of segue into our, measures discussion. So these are sort of the next steps coming up with the CPRG plan as a whole. Another thing to note, they did extend the deadline nationwide for that, so it's due June 1st. So next, as we're going to work through finalizing the measures, as we get more feedback from you, work with our consultants on that, we'll get those quantified, and then we'll get into the reduction target setting, co-pollutants and co-benefits analysis. We will also be doing a workforce analysis, and then writing the report itself. And a few of these tasks we've sort of begun with some light, background research, things like that. But yeah, we expect to tell you more about it as we get into it next year. But moving on for now, proposed emissions reduction measures. So if everyone could get your handouts handy, if you have those.
So what are the next steps after the report? Like, once you guys complete the report, what are you gonna do after? Or is it gonna recognize like recommendations or?
Yeah, so the deliverable is to the EPA's pollution reduction grant. And originally it was a period of 4 years where the first 2 years were planning related to produce the priority climate action plan, the PCAP, and now the CCAP, comprehensive climate action plan. And then the remainder 2 years were around monitoring and reporting. So now that the CCAP has been pushed back by almost a year from its original due date in August of this year, that really only leaves a year of like monitoring and reporting and for the original EPA grant. GNRC's intent is to produce a document that can be utilized by every county that's covered in the 17 county planning area to use that for recommendations and implementation of some of these areas that help to reduce those emissions reductions. So similar to TDEC and the TVERS initiative, it's really around voluntary implementation. So it's, I think what GNRC will focus on is making sure that our local jurisdictions are aware of what's in the plan and how we can be a resource to help them implement some of these recommendations to reduce emissions. Does that answer? Okay.
Okay, so getting into the emissions reduction measures. So first, we want to clarify EPA uses the term emissions reduction measures. We've found that sometimes that can be kind of confusing for readers. So we use the term strategy to describe what EPA is calling a measure. This is just a tangible, quantifiable activity that will reduce emissions within each economic sector to reach that overall reduction target that we set. And so within each of these strategies, we are going to have actions, which are going to be the specific implementation activities, programs, policies that we're creating that are going to support this strategy. So as you read through this handout, note that the strategies as they're written are meant to be a more finalized version than the actions themselves. The actions here are just options that are going to be modeled, and we're going to finalize those based upon the emissions reduction potential that we see and other feedback that we receive from you, working with our consultants, et cetera. And then some of these actions, you'll notice that we've separated them into like direct or indirect. So some can be quantified, reported at the same level of strategies. You could actually, find a measurable reduction in emissions from them, whereas others are just indirect supporting things like outreach, education, type of activities like that. So as we're going through these, the sort of questions to keep in mind, things to consider. One, do you agree with the strategy, but maybe not the language? Like, as a reader, is it just not quite clear to you what exactly we're talking about? Second, are any of these strategies too broad or too narrow? Do you have alternative suggestions for how we could consolidate them, maybe separate some concepts, just ways to move them around, maybe to make that more clear? And then finally, do you see any major gaps in the strategies and actions? Do you have suggestions for additional actions that are suited to our region, particularly to the area you're from, perhaps? Essentially, just what we want to get out of this little second round of feedback from you is just what our region is most interested in pursuing. We want to make sure that the strategies cover that, and we also want to make sure that they're all distinct ideas. Whereas we recognize that a lot of these little sub-actions underneath each strategy can sort of be moved around, applied to others just because of how they are. We do still want to make sure that the strategies themselves still feel like separate ideas. So with that in mind, what we're going to do, we're not going to read through every single thing in this handout. I'm just going to read through our main strategy statement. And then we'll kind of go sector by sector. And if you've come with thoughts already, feel free to shout out if you have any feedback right now. Or at the end, I'll remind you, we're asking for just email feedback. So, as you look at these, just email me and we'll get your feedback that way. All right, and here we go. So first, we're starting with the electricity generation sector. And we have two strategies in this sector. Strategy E1 is reduce emissions impact from non-renewable power sources. And this means increase the storage capacity of electric power utilities to reduce the impact from high-emitting non-renewable energy sources like gas, coal, and oil. So the focus there is on, the storage, BESS systems, things like that. And then strategy E2 here, shift power generation to renewable energy sources. So transitioning long-term to alternative renewable energy sources like solar, geothermal, and renewable natural gas in support of the TVA's 2025 IRP and other energy initiatives. So as you kind of browse through these little actions, keep in mind those aren't finalized, but that can sort of give you a better idea of the exact sort of things that we're planning under each of these. But so first, does anybody have any comments on these two electricity generation strategies particularly?
I know TVA is working on some nuclear power options at Oak Ridge, so I wonder if that should be included this time.
Thank you.
We're trying to work with Nashville Electric to increase the Flex program with TVA. It's currently at 5%. And I think at a recent conference, somebody from NES said that they're open to pushing for that. And that's changed in other places in the country where they've increased the amount that they're allowed to create. So that, and then balcony solar is something we're looking at as well. Plug in place.
I was gonna ask, if I noticed there's only one mention of the local power companies, and given that those are TVA's customers, NES and others, I don't know I'm not familiar with others in the region, but like maybe enumerating those or just having that as a clear path for planners to be engaging, because those folks can make those generation side decisions with their 5%.
TVA is a little harder to push around than, not push around, but to engage with.
Yeah, as like an inclusive engagement point, I think TVA is a good to mention because they obviously are doing the generation, but as that more ideas about LPCs, and I'm happy to email like some more specific thoughts, but I think Pat's point about NES is a good one, and there are others probably serving the region.
Thank you. Anybody else on electricity?
Is there a reason why like recyclable energy isn't as a strategy? So like nuclear, because you have renewable there, but was there like some intention behind leaving out recyclable as a strategy, or is it just kind of?
I don't think it was meant to be left out. I think nuclear was part of our conversation, so I think it just got left out accidentally. It is intended to be included.
All right, moving on to, oh, my clicker stopped again. Oh, okay. All right, sorry about that. Okay, moving on with natural, agricultural, and working land sector strategies. So first here, strategy N1, we have create and expand carbon sinks through active forestry and grassland management practices. So this is ensuring the consistent application of proven active forestry and grassland management practices that protect soils, maintain native vegetation and forest health, increase carbon storage, and reduce emissions caused by improper management. Strategy N2, implement emissions reducing agricultural management practices and technologies. So this is adopt and increase the application of agricultural best management practices and technological advancements that protect soils, maintain healthy crops and livestock, and reduce emissions from farming operations and agricultural mismanagement. And I want to note there that the sort of difference that we're going for between those two is that N1 is sort of more of the focus on expansion of carbon sinks. And we do touch a little bit on how improper management of forests can lead to emissions in itself, but it's primarily about the carbon sinks there. And then 2 is about improving agricultural practices. So minimizing emissions from, their operations, things that they do in farming. And then strategy N3, preserve and expand green space in the built environment. So increase the preservation and expansion of urban, suburban, and rural native landscapes, tree canopy coverage, green spaces, and green infrastructure, all within the built environment. And then again, you can sort of just browse through those little actions. But any feedback on these 3 strategies right now?
I will say like the idea of like trying to incentivize regenerative agriculture as a way that's not just like limiting the carbon that's being emitted, but actually thinking of it as a sink, as a carbon sink, like being able to replenish our soils that have already been depleted in carbon. I know there's a lot of issues because of like crop insurance that you can't get if you're doing regenerative practices. So being able to sort of incentivize that in a way that you can leverage policies to change that.
Thank you.
I was going to add kind of under the expanding green space in the built environment. I can see that you're trying to capture sort of the very urban area of Nashville and then sort of the surrounding areas. So I think there could be some more specificity, for example, under 43, that's like invest in installation of green infrastructure. I think that looks different in the city of Nashville versus surrounding counties. And so maybe giving some more specificity of what that means for an area like Nashville and connecting that in with their existing stormwater management fees and programs that they already have. I think that would help. And sort of similarly under the urban forestry one, I see you all, mentioned Route Nashville, but of course that's Davidson County specific right now. So thinking regionally for those 2.
Also under 43, you have like invest in installation of green infrastructure and funding for implementation, but I think it would be important to include a maintenance or like upkeep, because that's what we see a lot in our built environment grants. It's not just we want to create a new park, but we need to fix the existing one. So
Anything else on these strategies? Okay. We will move to building and industrial process strategies. So with these, we sort of based on the those inventory results, I said the largest potential for emissions reduction was in residential commercial buildings. So we have 2 here sort of geared towards that. And then that 3rd one is going to be for industrial processes. So strategy B1, improve energy efficiency of existing buildings, invest in building weatherization and energy efficiency retrofits to reduce energy consumption in existing residential and commercial buildings. And then strategy B2, increase energy performance standards of new buildings, modernize building practices, technologies, and systems that reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the construction, operations, and maintenance of new buildings and facilities. So the distinction between those 2 is sort of that existing buildings versus new buildings. B2 is focused more on, like energy ordinances, things like that. I think, the things you need to comply with to build a new building. Whereas B1 is things we're implementing into already existing. And then strategy B3, increase energy efficiency of industrial processes. So implement emissions reducing energy efficiency upgrades and best practices for industrial processes. And in that industrial processes section, we do call out water treatment, wastewater treatment a little bit. That was sort of lower in our emissions, but we did want to touch on that just a tiny bit. So we've thrown that here for now. Any initial feedback on these strategies?
Charge of enforcing industrial process improvements, would that be like an industry-wide policy or through economic development organizations or codes in communities or industrial development boards? I mean, who would regionally be working through these processes to improve greenhouse gases?
Well, I guess because this is more on the planning aspect and not the implementation enforcement, I haven't gotten that far with my analysis. But that is a good thing to bring up, and I will look into that. Thank you.
I would guess that at least at a corporate level, like just for if there wasn't an industry body, it would be under the ESA. So the health and safety officer or the person who's thinking about like their ISO compliance, because ISO standard is used to look at energy efficiency, and then UL has some. So it would probably be embedded in there, at least at a corporate.
I'll also say to Amy's point, that is one of the big difficulties, because I know Skylar set it up and kind of how she framed these measures and strategies and actions. A lot of what we're recommending is voluntary in nature, but a lot of voluntary activities aren't necessarily the most hard hitting. So it's a very fine line between kind of in a perfect ideal world, what are things that we would like to see happen, and what are the things that we can, include in the plan. But then we also have to have kind of an awareness that some of these things might not be as easily accomplishable as others.
Would it be helpful to separate out like municipal and state-owned buildings in the footprint like you've done for the transportation sector? I know my past life working on these in a city, it can be helpful for planners to be able to say like, this is our municipally owned footprint of building. And it's not going to be like a climate savior, but it's something, and they can be demonstrated projects. And so I don't know if that would be helpful to separate out in terms of a distinct category to help with ownership and implementation. I don't know if that data exists, but
that is a helpful point. And we do have another like vision for this plan is we want it to be very audience focused. So we do, as we get into choosing all these, we do plan to sort of separate out our audience for each and who will be implementing each of these things, so that will be considered further down the line. But thank you.
Like action 1 through 3 is for local governments. Actions 6 through 12 are for like renters, homeowners, or like easily implementable on a smaller scale.
it'll be far more helpful than the one I worked on, which sat in a player's desk.
I've been hearing about thermal energy networks too, which is a really easy thing to implement when you're doing new developments. Basically, you're running a water line next to a gas line in order to share heat. So I see heat recovery here, but heat sharing and energy sharing between buildings is, gas companies are starting to do that across the country.
Else?
58 seem a little contradictory. So retrofitting buildings with natural gas, I feel like electrification is the push.
Again, like I said, these are our options for modeling. So sometimes we have things there that are going to look contradictory, but we're going to test both, see which would be better, and go for that.
Geothermal, is there anything to using that for heating and cooling? New building.
That goes along with those thermal energy networks. Is if you're running that boring holes, you've got both.
I did make a note about that though, so I will. Any last comments? Buildings and industrial processes? All right. Moving on to transportation. Okay, so first in transportation, strategy T1, reduce travel demand and trip distances through community design. So plan and promote compact, connected, mixed-use development to increase the proximity between homes, jobs, schools, and transit services, reducing the distance between destinations and the need to drive. Strategy T2, transition to cleaner fuels and propulsion technologies. So this is going to include accelerating the transition to electric, hybrid, and other alternative fuel vehicles by supporting the adoption and expanding fueling and charging infrastructure for those vehicles and fuels. And then strategy T3, shift single occupancy vehicle trips to alternative modes. So improve the safety, utility, and appeal of alternative shared and active transportation options like public transit, biking, walking, scooters, to promote a more long-term shift away from single occupancy vehicles. Initial thoughts on these strategies? Yes, Andrew?
I'd recommend putting in on the first one, something on TOD, transit-oriented development. Just a wording thing. You basically address it, but.
Thank you.
I'd also say too, instead of trip distances for strategy 1, wouldn't you want to change it to vehicle miles traveled, since that's kind of like a industry standard on metrics?
So that's the sort of trouble we were having with the language on these, was because T1 and T3 both go towards reducing VMT.
Yeah.
So we kind of wanted to, in order to make sure that it was distinct, that the first is about, community design, community planning. And that third is more about the safety and increasing public transit use, things like that. So we moved away from using that specific language just so that it would maintain that separation. But that can definitely be.
The third one seems like mode split shift, right? So you guys are measuring like mode split, right? Whereas strategy 1, you're trying to reduce the miles traveled by a single occupancy vehicle.
Yeah.
So I think that there are 2 separate metrics. And they'll probably tie in T1 and T3 will talk to each other, because with some of the goals of transit-oriented developments, in a perfect world in Nashville, we could get developers to do TDM plans where they would provide surveys to their residents, businesses, et cetera, which would give you a baseline for T3, which would be the bulk split goals. Does that make sense?
I like how you described, because that makes sense to me. I do agree with that. Thank you.
That are more in kind of the format presentation realm. But one on the action 80, the construct pathways and critical infrastructure to provide direct routes between all the places. I want to be careful how we phrase that, because it could read as just build lots of roads everywhere to connect everything. And I don't think that solves the problem. I mean, obviously reducing trip distance does, but you could also encourage vehicle travel or single occupancy vehicle travel by doing that. So, I mean, maybe it's emphasizing certain modes more or something like that, worth considering. On the other, you probably are aware of this, but like the strategy 3 has an ITS infrastructure like traffic cameras and timers. It doesn't really feel like an alternative mode point. That's really more of like the efficiency of transportation.
Was that for strategy 2?
That's for, well, that's what's actually
Well,
what I
for
propose. It's in strategy 3 right now. And it's saying like install better traffic cameras and timers, things like that. I feel like you could almost group that in strategy 2 and talk more about like technology and efficiency, instead of kind of grouping that in with like, let's ride the bus more.
I think that one of the components missing in strategy 2 is that you take into consideration shifting like the electrical vehicle, like shifting like EVs, but it doesn't take into like, it doesn't include like e-bike fleets, right? Which is where you're going to reduce the SOVs in all 3 of these categories. So, maybe there's an opportunity to add like opportunity to introduce electric bicycle vehicle fleet to government agencies or something like that. Like it doesn't have to necessarily be an EV vehicle. I know that we're considering that at Metro.
Okay, thank you.
I think one thing that might tie in his comments is the idea that we're transitioning towards autonomous vehicles and what that's going to mean. If you think about like, you need to have data centers that support them that are going to have to be close by, and those are going to have a huge carbon footprint. So being able to sort of optimize that scenario.
Thank you. right. Any further feedback on these strategies? No? Okay. This is our last section here, our waste management strategies. So first, strategy W1, divert household and commercial waste from landfills through improved reduce, reuse, and recycle programs. So increase waste diversion by advancing sustainable materials management and improving local recycling, composting, and other reduce or reuse programs. Strategy W2, upgrade existing solid waste facilities and operations with emissions reduction and control retrofits. So reduce emissions from existing solid waste facilities with enhanced emissions control retrofits, installation and upgrade of gas recovery technologies, and other operational or policy improvements. And strategy W3, develop waste conversion solutions as an alternative to landfilling. So invest and promote innovative waste to energy technologies such as anaerobic digestion and combustion, and incorporate these WTE options as new solid waste management facilities are designed. Initial feedback on the waste strategies.
We're working on the waste jobs bill at Sierra Club, and basically what we've identified is there's just no funding to provide proper education. So that's the point of that bill, but you know, it's a tough landscape without raising taxes, but there's a way to do package EPR and support that so that we can, I also think there's education about where our trash goes that needs to be done. And I see that you've got education in here about recycling programs, but a lot of our recycled items don't end up getting to the landfills, unfortunately, due to different single stream issues and incentives for like waste management companies to, they get paid twice if they end up taking a truck of recyclables to their landfill, which incentivizes it. So there's education around that. And then, you know, funding is the thing that's probably been holding back Tennessee since the education started in the early 90s. You know.
To your point about recycling, that's something we help out with solid waste annual progress reports across the region. And that's something that we run into with a lot of folks who really would like to be recycling more than they're able to financially. And so sometimes people look at it as like recycling versus fiscal responsibility, which is not always a great position to be in.
Other feedback on waste strategies?
Was there anything in there about, like, we have commercial districts in, like, especially at the bars on Broadway that have a real tough time recycling. There's glass, like, there's not a way for them to participate because of the land that they're at, the space that they're in. I don't know where that fits in, but with those kind of tourist districts, it can be really tough. Right. That is all of the initial feedback we have. So further comments and questions, please email me, Skylar Ellis, by Tuesday, December 23rd, with any further feedback or questions you might have about these. If you read them again and you find you have a whole lot more thoughts, or just you come up with anything new, feel free to reach out to me, share that. And again, just remember to consider those questions. Do you agree with them, but maybe just not the language? Are they too broad or narrow? Should we move things around a bit? Do you see any gaps, things that you think are really important that we really should include in there? Yeah, I will include all this information in my follow-up email to you as well. So that should wrap up that section. And we will lead into around the table. So thank you all for your feedback there. Also, I want to note, thank you to everyone who gave feedback on our first round on that NAC. That was very helpful. Thank you if you did that. All right, so around the table. This is where you can share any information you'd like about your organization, just interesting activities you've heard of around. But yeah. Anyone, feel free to raise your hand if you have something to share.
We just did a Lime mobility study with the League of American Cyclists in Lime to study how Lime scooters and e-bikes get around Nashville. And so we're one of 3 cities, and that webinar was recorded on Tuesday. And it was a great opportunity to kind of explore how micromobility devices connect to and from transit stops and connecting the first and last mile, and how infrastructure speaks to higher ridership and how, you know, users feel safer. So that report is on the League's website, and then we'll have it on the NDOT website as well.
The league, you say the name of the league again, where we can find it?
Yeah, League of American Bicyclists. Yeah, so we're one of 3 cities to kind of analyze the micromobility devices because we have a lot of them here.
So one thing the Department of Health has worked on for a while is something called the Livability Indicators Dashboard, and it's a new data dashboard we did in coordination with ETSU's Center for Rural Health and Research, and a lot of state agencies worked on it, county level data about, is this community in Tennessee livable? And what does that look like? So we just launched that, and we'll be updating it soon, so I can make sure you get the link and everyone can look at it and like provide feedback and think about what's missing from it. I know we have a lot of work to do on the environment section in particular. And then 2 other things sort of coming up for us. Our environmental resiliency work group has been working on trainings. They are for health department staff, but it will be available publicly. And one of them that could be of interest, we've worked with the Tennessee Climate Office to do a training on climate hazards in Tennessee. So that will be very Tennessee focus with Tennessee examples, which we think is really palatable, and maybe people will see that as more useful than some national trainings. And then a second part to that is sort of like, what does this mean for you as health department staff? So if I see mom and baby in clinic for vaccination, what can I tell them about heat or something like that? So maybe not as applicable, but we'll have those 2 parts, should be launching in January. So I'll make sure those are shared as well. And then something else I was thinking of as we were going through this list of actions. So you may have heard of the Healthcare Transformation Program, which is a big program coming down from the federal government. So all states applied for it. We should hear if we got it at the end of December, or how much we got. We know we got something. But in Tennessee's application, which is public and you can read online, we have asked for additional funding to expand our Healthy Built Environment program and active transportation. So you may not think you're healthcare related. You may not think of that as a funding source, but in the event we get what we ask for there, which we anticipate, we'll be getting a lot of funding for that next year. So think about that.
Else, anything to share?
This might be relevant to our previous discussion, but so I'm working with Jonathan Gilligan and Vishesh Kumar on creating some agent-based models for looking at like stakeholder engaged like processes, right? So a good example of that is we're developing an innovation district at Vanderbilt is, and we want to engage the local community in that process, right? Because we know when we do this, it's going to affect people in different ways. And so we're focusing now on runoff because, for example, we can create more impervious space. It's going to increase the amount of runoff, and involving the community in those conversations is, I think, is going to be a good way of sort of meeting them where they are and giving them agency in the process. And so as we move forward, we're going to be writing an NSF proposal to do this for runoff specifically, but we could see this being adapted in a lot of different scenarios, like what we're talking about today.
So thank you. Oh, yeah.
Couple things on the waste to energy. 2 things. First, the GNRC took a trip to Huntsville sometime earlier this year. And the second thing is, I think there's a report on the whole waste to energy thing on the GNRC website. Is it possible to have a presentation to this group on the trip and the report to catch us up on that?
Definitely something for 2026 meetings that we can talk about as solid waste focus for one of those meetings. I've thought about that for meetings this year, actually. So
Appreciate it.
thank you.
Metro Nashville has released a lot of new dashboards this year. So if people aren't aware, we've got our greenhouse gas inventory that we completed for 2022. And the dashboard shows how we rebaselined 2019 as our base year and all the inventories we've done, actually back to 2014. So that's available in a public dashboard. There's also a public facing dashboard for our solar production and renewable portfolio standard tracking to help us meet that mandate and track our progress on the growing solar at Metro. And then we also have a high performance buildings dashboard that we update every year. So the update to that this year is another one of our public facing dashboards. So I can send you a link to all those.
Great, thank you. Anything else to share around the table? All right, thank you everybody for sharing. Now GNRC is going to share a little bit about some of our upcoming activities. So we're going to be jumping around between some of our staff here to go over some of these. So first, we're going to do regional transportation planning, and our lovely executive director, Michael Skipper, is going to talk to you about that.
Lovely. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Afternoon, I guess now. Great conversation. I was listening from my office. Really appreciate the feedback on the measures for emissions reduction. Look forward to additional feedback from you all over the next couple of weeks. As far as the transportation plan goes, we had a really good meeting of our transportation policy board in this room yesterday, where mayors and transportation officials from the state got together to begin looking at a near first draft of our transportation plan for the next 25 years. It includes projects that right now total about $15 billion worth of cost to implement. We've got about $15.8 billion of anticipated revenue over the next 25 years. So we have a tall task in front of us to figure out what our priorities are with the limited resources that we have to improve transportation. But you can continue to follow along that process online at gnrc.org/RTP. Just the acronym for Regional Transportation Plan. We've got a few chapters already published on the website, as well as a map tracking the proposed improvements that have been submitted to us by city and county governments, TDOT, and transit agencies. On that map, you could also see the composite layer of environmentally sensitive areas that this group helped define over the last few years and updated last year. So you can see those projects relative to contextual information like growth forecasts, traffic congestion, high crash areas, environmentally sensitive areas. So welcome your feedback on that. As we narrow our focus to the cost feasible plan, which would be the projects that are in line for actual funding, actual dollars for implementation, we'll begin to do a little bit more analysis on the potential environmental impacts of building those projects so that we can encourage our locals and our state to mitigate their activities best as possible. That's my part for this.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Now we are going to jump to our resident watershed-based plan expert, Maddie Bowles.
It was really killing it with these intros today. No big updates to report to you all. Oh, thank you. This is a map of recent watershed-based plans that GNRC has completed in green. So they're kind of, well, recent is maybe like not a great term because they span like 5 years back. So some of them are a little bit older now, but those two orange ones in Montgomery County, right outside of Clarksville, those are our upcoming watershed-based plans. So I will give a little plug for those. We haven't started much with them yet. I'm starting to like pull very preliminary information and get a list of stakeholders together to meet with. But if you all know of anyone who is kind of in the water quality sphere in Clarksville, Montgomery County, we have a handful of pretty great contacts from local governments and different departments up there. But if you know any stakeholders or like water quality groups who would maybe like to be involved, I would love to get their names on my roster. Also, I will do another plug for this probably at our first 2026 meeting, but if you know anyone who's interested in romping around in a stream in Clarksville, the offer is always there. So that's my pretty brief update.
So now, again, continuing with Maddie and Chris Barber, they're going to talk to you about our brownfield site inventories.
Yes, okay, so I am going to get us started. I believe that we have mentioned this work to the Environmental Roundtable before, but sometimes our meetings get rushed a little bit at the end. So if I haven't, GNRC received a BRAG grant a little while ago now, and it was an identification grant for 11 counties in our region. And so essentially what that means for us is that we are looking at potential brownfield sites in those 11 counties. It's our regional map with the exclusion of, I believe, Trousdale and Williamson counties. And what that has looked like so far for us has been a lot of internal kind of researching. There are 3 GNRC teams involved in this project. So we have some planning folks on the environmental side. We have some economic development folks. And then we also have our data and research team kind of supporting us all the way through. And so a lot of what we've been doing so far is looking at a lot of existing data sets of like underground storage tanks or other potential contaminant indicators. And now we're kind of ground truthing that and doing more specific site research, looking at specific sites and adding those into our list. And I think with that, I'll hand it over to Chris to give a little bit more on the outreach front.
Yeah, so hello, everybody. I'm Chris Barber again from the ECD department here at GNRC. So as you might imagine, there's only so much you can really glean from gathering data sets and trying to ascertain like where a potential brownfield might be based on those data sets like TDEC's DOR or the EPA's FRS data. So we're at the stage now where we're soliciting stakeholder input about sites around our region. What I've encountered personally is that folks have maybe some preconceptions or hesitations about what might be a brownfield. So, you know, it doesn't have to be I make the joke, it doesn't have to be a pit of burning tires to be a brownfield. You know, oftentimes contamination is historical, it's unseen. So, you know, we're oftentimes having to do historical research about like what was a site? Was there a dry cleaner there? Was there a gas station there? Something that's been gone for decades, right? So our ask to you is that, you know, when you're going about your work, interacting with stakeholders and people in your communities, that you be mindful of our inventory that we're developing and help provide us potential sites, because TDEC is interested in returning these sites to their highest use. That's the term, right? Or higher use. You had a fancy term that I liked.
Just, you know, higher, better.
A higher use, right? So this identification is just one part of the BRAG grant. So if it's identified, it can then go on to be remediated, planned for, et cetera. So it's not necessarily a requirement that a site be identified by us in the inventory, but it will definitely make for a stronger application if a municipality or an owner wants to pursue a BRAG grant in the future. So we're just asked that you keep us in mind to help provide us sites, hopefully by the end of the month if possible, and encourage you to take business cards of mine if you can. So thank you guys.
I've been kind of helping lead the site investigation and kind of like field notes write up. Really, a simple address is like all we need, and that'll get the ball rolling for us. So it doesn't have to be, it's not a super heavy ask that we're asking you all for. We've got an address in mind, shoot it our way, and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but at least we know.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. I'll add a couple of things to brownfields. One is just so you know what our ambition is here with this work. One is just to get these sites identified so we get funding to clean them up. The state's perspective is really one about, at least through the governor's leadership, about getting investment to these sites to redevelop them, because these sites typically are going to already have access to transportation infrastructure, utilities. So they're in a good position to accommodate future jobs expansions across our region versus a greenfield development. But also there's an opportunity to clean them up and return them to Mother Earth. So it's also helping us to achieve our regional conservation goals by cleaning up these sites. But they first need to be known about and then made eligible for the future funding. The reason why Trousdale and Williamson counties are not included in our work directly is that those two communities received other BRAG grants, and TDEC didn't want to award more than one grant to any given community. So it's as simple as that. But as those communities identify their sites, they'll be rolled into our regional database of brownfield sites. So I appreciate you two for your work on that. I'll move into solid waste if you like. All right, so we're tracking a couple of things on the solid waste front. One is GNRC has position on the TDEC's statewide solid waste master plan steering committee. So we're tracking the development of that plan. I don't really know where that is in its process in terms of being public facing. The other thing that's happening with the state is the legislature has created a solid waste task force primarily to deal with the issue of landfill capacity. And our interest as a region, as we represent the city and county mayors who are grappling with this challenge, is really twofold. One is to make sure that our pursuit of challenges, solving challenges related to capacity doesn't lead us down the path. We're just trying to build more landfill capacity, that we are actually thinking about reducing the waste streams going even up to the manufacturing and packaging side of things, but also just reducing consumption and generation of waste. But when we do need to do something with waste, that we are converting it to some useful byproduct instead of just putting it into the earth, right? So that's one, is just making sure the policy discussion around this issue isn't just one about increasing capacity for landfilling, but number two is that there's a recognition on this issue that there really isn't a great quarterback. On the transportation issue, you have TDOT, who owns assets, who manages those assets, who's also aligned with the funding and the planning for those assets. On the solid waste issue, there really isn't that. It's been really up to counties over the history of our state to deal with the issue, and the county landfills are no longer really a thing. And so what we're trying to do through our regional efforts is to build shared capacity across the region to be a buyer of our solid waste systems, to bring more leverage to the table and in negotiating with the private sector for those solutions that address our needs. It's very difficult for any one individual community to deal with this on their own. So we're really trying to build that institutional capacity at a regional scale to drive those solutions. So that's my update on that.
Disaster recovery and improving resiliency, and our community and regional planning director, Jessica Hill, will tell you about that.
All right. One last update. Thank you for sticking with us. So GNRC received a U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration, or EDA, grant in response to the 2021 Waverly floods and subsequent natural disasters. The strong wind or high winds and tornadoes on our west side, but also through Davidson County and into the east side of Wilson. So we've been working to develop a toolkit for improving resiliency with our local communities. So I think somebody earlier mentioned about how we can adopt or make improvements to building codes, stream buffers, stormwater runoff. So a lot of more land use, subdivision, zoning controls to improve the resilience of our local communities so that they can be better prepared for these disasters. We know they're increasing in frequency and severity. One of the first tasks that we're working on is just starting to consolidate a directory of those staff and organizations that are involved in resiliency and recovery. It's a very broad look. You've got your emergency management officials who are actually the ones responding to the disasters, but you have planners, you have economic development officials, environmental groups. So public health is very important. So if you know of an organization that we should be looking to have conversations with to help us make sure that this toolkit and this effort aligns and doesn't duplicate efforts, we would love to get your input on that. You can reach out to myself or any of our team, but that is so we're hoping in the new year to pull together some groups and focus groups to have those conversations around what would best support our region in improving resiliency. So thank you so much.
And just quickly, some upcoming meetings to note: Transportation Coordinating Committee, January 7th, Transportation Policy Board, January 21st, and Regional Council meeting, February 28th. You can find all these meetings online on the GNRC calendar. The Environmental Roundtable, we do not have our dates set for next year yet. Just keep in mind, it's typically quarterly. So, but I will be in touch with emails and whatnot. So.
Well, is it worth just going and announcing that say that pattern over time?
We haven't fully decided exactly when. We just know it's going to be quarterly.
It's been published. So it is.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
now we might have to move them
okay.
because of conflicts, but we can go ahead and get folks to kind of think about it on the
I didn't know
calendar.
that had been published. But yes, it's usually the second Wednesday of the second month of each quarter. I'm sure that was very helpful.
So February, May,
August.
August, and then November.
So tentatively expect that, but I will be in touch with emails and yes. But anyway, thank you all so much for coming today. I hope everyone has very happy holidays and we will see you in 2026.
City of Charlotte, yeah.
Okay.
And I